So we're going to start with Jim Wolfensohn. Please join us. Jim Wolfensohn, as you all know, is a legendary former head of the World Bank. He now is the chairman of Wolfensohn and Company, an investment and advisory firm. He's also about to publish a book. So in October, please go buy A Global Life. I'm particularly glad he's here because of his global perspective. He's an Australian originally, and now is on the advisory board of CIC, China's Sovereign Wealth Fund. So he brings that really global perspective to the issues of today. And I just wanted to add, in case anyone is feeling particularly proud of themselves for climbing camelback, Jim is an Olympic athlete as well. He was on the Australian fencing team. And just to add to his sort of intimidating Renaissance qualifications, he is also a cellist and learned how to play the cello in his 40s and went on to perform in Carnegie Hall. So maybe tonight, Nikesh, for free entertainment, you can get a cello out and we'll see how good Jim is. He's going to give us a tour d'horizon of the world economy now. Please, Jim.
Thank you so much. Well, I think with that introduction, I shouldn't speak at all because it's downhill from here. But I have been asked to share the panel here with Nouriel, and that itself is daunting when you ask to speak about the economy, because I've spent the last couple of days Googling Nouriel and everything he said so that I could be smarter than he is. And by agreement, I'm going to stay very lightly on the current economy and simply say that today is almost 2 years from the date of the Lehman Brothers collapse. It just seems like a hell of a lot longer for those of us that have been living through this environment, which I guess all of you have. And it's only 18 months since we finished the significant downturn at 6 or 7% per quarter that followed that event. I need hardly remind you that before that we had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that we had Bear Stearns, that we had Merrill Lynch going into Bank of America. And so we've been through a sort of revolution in terms of the financial industry, and a period that is certainly unprecedented in my working lifetime, and which has shaken very much of the way in which I at least have looked at the global economy and at the financial markets. I'm sure Nouriel will comment on the last quarter and the disappointing results, and as you know, he is very significantly balanced or slightly pessimistic, perhaps, in his approach to where we're going. But it's valid because we're at a time when primary unemployment in our country is over 9.6%. When you add the people that are involuntarily unemployed for part-time work, you're around 16-17% unemployment. And these are numbers that we really had not thought of in my working lifetime until recently. And they have a profound effect on the way in which we judge our economy and in which we judge the world in which we live. Inflation, as I need hardly tell you, is not a real issue at the moment, but our budget is in poor shape in our country. I need hardly go into those figures with you, and we're on the way to 2020, 2030 of having our country with 100% debt to GDP, which is not a trivial moment and raises questions about where do we go from there. But let me move away from that and the current analysis and just think a little bit about where we're going in the future and what is it that we in this forum, and indeed outside this forum, need to be thinking about as the global frame in which we're working. As I worked in my early career up to the year 2000, it was all fairly simple. There are a bunch of rich countries that had 75 to 80% of the global GDP, There was about 1 billion people in a planet 2000 of 6 billion, and there were 5 billion other people who had 20% of the global GDP. And if you were especially far-sighted and interested, you started to think about what might happen to those people, what happened, what were the issues of poverty, what were the issues of social justice, and if you were crazy, you then went to work for the World Bank to see if you could do something about it. And it was not an easy challenge, but it was a challenge which was there before us until the year 2000 in fairly static form. If you were young and vigorous and you were interested in social justice, you tried to get a job working part-time or sometime in the developing world. And as I discovered coming from Australia, it was incredibly difficult as a young Australian to get a job that would take you into this activity. And so I took another alternative and gave up the law and went to the Harvard Business School, which couldn't be more far from these issues. Except that today, Harvard and many other universities are starting to look at this question of what is the world that's out there that we haven't spent a lot of time on. In the first 10 years of this decade, we've seen that 75 to 80% of global GDP in the rich countries moving down by 10%. And we've seen an extraordinary change that I'm sure all in this room would understand, but far too many do not understand when they do the analysis, which is a move eastward again to a growth of global economic activity, notably in China and India. In the year 1500 and in 1815, China and India were 50% of the global GDP, a lot smaller than today. And after World War II, China and India were 1.5% of the global GDP. Basket cases in terms of the impact and in terms of their apparent economic outlook. And we in the West were dominant in terms of first manufacturing, then in the service sector, and certainly also in the research and the high-tech field. A lot changed in this last 2 years to draw our attention to the fact that we couldn't relax in terms of that situation. The first thing, of course, that happened is that we had $50 trillion in sort of global write-downs. We had a 12% reduction in global trade. Commodity prices went through the floor. Capital flows from the rich to the poor countries went from 1.3 billion a year down to 350 million a year. These are not trivial adjustments. These are fundamental changes in the way in which our world operates. But perhaps more important than that is the fact that the dominance of the West, the dominance of people in this room, who no doubt are still dominant, the dominance in manufacturing and the service industries and high tech has shifted. It shifted very meaningfully to Asia. And you need only to look at some of the statistics to see just what is happening. China and India have sequentially taken over leadership in a substantial part of these three areas. And as we look at the way in which the future is holding itself, as we look at education, as we look at research, in our country and in the G20, research is dropping in terms of a percentage of GDP. And if you look at the academic statistics, it's really quite astonishing. There's some 350,000 Indians and 350,000 Chinese studying abroad each year at university level. About 100,000, according to the latest statistics, each from China and India at our universities. And if any of you attend graduations, you will see when you look at the doctoral degree candidates and the degree people in engineering and for most of the scientific areas, it looks significantly like Asia. And that is true at the various universities that I've attended their ceremonies. And when you talk to the professors about the students that are going there, significantly, and without great statistics, significantly, they will tell you that the movement towards Asia is both real and significant. And indeed, if you just happen to go to the co-op of any one of these universities and you walk through to see you want to buy a t-shirt, you'll see inside these co-ops the extent to which Asia is projecting itself. And we're falling behind also in terms of growth. If the world growth is 4% this year, and I'm sure Nouriel will comment on this, the advanced economies are something less than 2% in terms of annual growth. China and India, with China in the lead, of course, are virtually double digits in terms of growth. And these are not just numbers to throw around. These are material advances in terms of the pace of economic activity. And while I don't put too much strength in terms of World Bank statistics since I left, I have got the new statistics. I do have the new statistics, and they are really quite remarkable as you project out shares of global income. Just let me give you a few numbers. The G7 in 2010, 52% of global income. 2025, 41.7. 2050, 25%. Drop down to China and India, 2010, 11.2%, by the way, substantially up from years past. 2025, 24.8. 2050, 47.5, with a 60% expectation of share of global growth in Asia by 2050. Now let's assume I'm off by 10% or 20% or 25%, or that I'm off by 5 years or 10 years. The truth is that this change is monumental in terms of the way in which we look at our planet, and very, very sadly, we're doing very little about it. I mentioned that the 350,000 students coming from China and India, each country, 40 or 50,000 in my country of origin in Australia, amazingly, 100,000 plus in this country. We have 13,000 students as of 2 years ago studying in China and 3,100 in India. And if you look at the statistics of where our kids are studying, it's still going back to Europe, with some in Latin America, and more recently, some interest in the Middle East. But in terms of projection, we're missing out. In terms of the breakdown of students from Asia, notably from China, 35% in engineering or in engineering-related activities. In the United States, 5%. Now, I don't guarantee all these numbers. They happen to be the ones that I got from the bank. But directionally, you have to draw a message. The message is that there is a huge move to Asia. In a meeting like this, where we have people from many countries and a significant US presence, you have to be encouraged by what is happening here and by the resumes of the people here and by the companies that are represented. But relative in terms of global growth and in terms of global economic activity, we still have the Googles and we still have some other examples. But the challenge is there and is very real. And so the point that I want to leave Nouriel with, as I'm sure he will also cover perhaps more adequately than I these areas, is that we're in the midst of a really major change of moving eastward. It's a change that my generation didn't anticipate. and sadly didn't do a hell of a lot about. But it is reality. And for anyone who visits China or India today, or Asia in general, this reality is apparent. Certainly, I believe that at this forum, where many ideas will emerge, we would do well to recognize that we're not alone in thinking about the future. And at least at this moment, Asia has to be having a momentum that we sorely lack. Thank you very much.